All right, November 27th. So we're just going to start at the beginning of Daniel. Just talk through a little bit of the first few chapters and then get into the reading today. What twirl there.
I liked what you said in the sermon about the ending of that reading.
Yeah,
It
right?
really rubs me the wrong way.
I know. And the same thing is true in Esther. We read it last year where it's very violent. They just like, we're going to get back at everybody who, and it's very gruesome and violent. I'm like, this does not feel like the goal, but.
No, and even more than that was that he sent the other people right into the deal.
And their wives and children, too.
I know.
Punch their bones.
I know.
I'm going.
It's like the message is not that violence is wrong. The message is that violence against the wrong people is wrong. But and it's such a different way of thinking that just because we definitely see how violence happens in the Old Testament, and it's not really questioned unless it's done to me, right?
Yes.
Anyway, so
Well, who doesn't like a good smiting the unbelievers?
right? So Daniel is a very smart person who finds his way coming up the ladder. In the very beginning of Daniel, he is found to be someone who's very capable, and so they bring him to King Nebuchadnezzar. He interprets a dream of Nebuchadnezzar's, kind of like Joseph does, and he and his friends get promoted. And then we have in chapter 3 the beginning of the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abendago, who are friends with Daniel, also Jews. And we can read chapter 3 here, and it's just going to play out in just direct parallel to the sound of what we'll read with Daniel in the lion's den. So if anyone wants to read chapter 3, see if we can pick out some of the similarities.
So, but okay, before we do that, but why do you think there's people copying one story from another?
I think they're telling these stories. I guess you could ask the question, like, why is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abendago, the lion's den, and Esther have so much of the same rhythm?
Yeah.
That's a good question. Definitely, the writers wanted to bring home the fact that the Jews were not a problem in a foreign land, that they were the ones who were being good citizens, but when persecution happened, then they were faithful and they did the courageous thing, even if it would have gotten them killed. And in all three of the stories, death was very imminent. And then the king, who always seems to be a dingus, it's not the king's fault, it's the other people. And they're the ones making the law that the king goes along with. And there's a whole thing we could talk about in terms of like power and stuff. And then the king changes the king's mind and goes, oh, these are the people. And so there must have been something that when the people were in exile, they were telling these stories to like give them comfort of like, this is how we are, like we're good people, we have integrity, and we're not the problem.
Politically helpful, too, to not have the king be the bad guy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's always some nasty advisor,
The
not
satraps
the king.
and the prefects and the magistrates.
So
And
these things were made up more for political stuff or whatever more than fact.
I don't know.
Well, there may be.
I don't.
I think a lot of stories probably started with something, because it's an oral tradition. So these stories would have been told and retold and retold. And the reason for these stories is today we tend to think of these stories as a history, but that's not why they would have told them back then.
Mhm.
They would have told them to tell them things that were important to remember, which wouldn't be a history. It would be how to be a people.
Sure. You know what, if you think about it, if we take a story, an event just happens here, and within 30 days, it's already got a different slant.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay,
The
so we
spin
think,
doctors, and especially if there's something that someone doesn't like in the story that for their group, they like to try and spin it. I mean,
sure, so that's gonna be, you can imagine this is over such a long, it kind of, people always say, every word is spiritually, and that's, to me, I really have a hard time with that, because I don't think a person's really thinking about God so much as they're not worshiping God, they're worshiping this.
Oh, yeah.
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 Yeah. It's interesting. I'm just briefly, I'm reading a book called Shunned, and it's a memoir of a woman who grew up Jehovah's Witness. And I'm actually really glad I read it, because I don't actually know that much about the Jehovah's Witness. And so this is really helpful. And it's not even like a condemnation of Jehovah's Witness. Rather, it is just to me, reading about what happens when you've built a belief so airtight with the Bible that there's no room for question or doubt, because then Satan has gotten to you, right? And it really does feel almost like it's more about the Bible than it is about God. And when she starts questioning, they always bring out the Bible. They don't try to understand her. They don't everything. It always comes back to, well, this Bible verse says this, therefore you're wrong. And what's happening now is that she is decided that no, she doesn't believe this. She wants to learn more. And she knows that by admitting that, she'll be excommunicated, which means her family has to shun her.
Because that would be letting Satan in.
Yeah, and if they didn't, then they would be, and there are Bible verses from 1 Timothy and Corinthians that talk about this.
Shunning? Right, I didn't know.
But when we read them, to me that just feels like I have the flexibility to go, well, that's what they thought was right in their time, but that doesn't mean we have to do that. In fact, right? So yeah, I agree with you that what is when everything else is taken away? What is the thing you hold on to? And for me, it's that God is love and grace. And that doesn't feel like what other people, right? The Bible is what we hold on to. Okay.
there's a lot of our own tradition. I mean, the Bible is still written by man and is still influenced by man. We can be inspired, and we may be writing down, even if we try to write things down as faithfully as we can, our own perspectives still slant what we're writing. I mean, it's extremely difficult for anyone to write down things verbatim that you're being told. Heck, with today's technology, when trying to type in at the rate the word talk is difficult, writing much more difficult. I mean, stenographers who've been trained to do this. I mean, and writing with their shorthand, I am extremely impressed with those folks who can nail those exact words for court proceedings and such.
Yeah, and also that's a very modern way of thinking. That was not the way the most of the Bible was written, with that intention of being like a court stenographer, which is a great example. We think about a reporter who has to, like, ideally, in the old days, just report what they're seeing and not put any slant in it. That's a modern understanding that has nothing to do with the way the Bible was written. It was meant to have a huge slant in it. The slant was, this is what I believe God did. This is what I believe God did. This is what we believe God did. So they'll tell a story that, other people may or may not have said happened, but they're whole, and it's a huge, heavy interpretation in it. In the way that, I might interpret a moment of my life and say, God was here in this moment. I can't prove that God was or wasn't. This is my belief. And hopefully it inspires other people, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's read chapter 3 here, and then we'll move to the one for today. So Nebuchadnezzar's the big word here.
I can read.
Okay.
All right. King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue whose height was 60 cubits and whose width was 6 cubits. He set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent for the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to assemble and come to the dedication of the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, counselors, treasurers, justices, magistrates, and officials assembled for the dedication of the statue that he had set up. When they were standing before the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, the herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O peoples, nations, and languages, that when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, you are to fall down and worship the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire." Therefore, as soon as all the people heard the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, all the peoples, nations, and languages fell down and worshipped the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Accordingly, at this time, certain Chaldeans came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble shall fall down and worship the golden statue, and whoever does not fall down and worship shall be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abendago. These pay no heed to you, O king. They do not serve your gods, and they do not worship the golden statue that you've set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abendago be brought in. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods, and you do not worship the golden statue that I have set up? Now if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, drum, and entire musical ensemble, to fall down and worship the statue that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. If our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods, and we will not worship the golden statue that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was so filled with rage against Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face was distorted. He ordered the furnace heated up 7 times more than was customary, and ordered some of the strongest guards in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and to throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So the men were bound, still wearing their tunics, their trousers, their hats, and their other garments, and they were thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Because the king's command was urgent, and the furnace was so overheated, the raging flames killed the men who lifted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But the 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abendago, fell down, bound into the furnace of blazing fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up quickly. He said to his counselors, "Was it not 3 men that we threw bound into the fire?" They answered the king, "True, O king." He replied, "But I see 4 men unbound, walking in the middle of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the 4th has the appearance of a god." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace and blazing fire and said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire, and the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair of their heads was not singed, their tunics were not harmed, and not even the smell of fire came from them. Nebuchadnezzar said, "Blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. They disobeyed the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that utters blasphemy against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb, and their houses laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon.
There we go.
Wow, thank
there's
you.
that revenge.
I believe this
know,
person
terrible.
got paid by the word.
Yeah.
I know.
Honestly.
It's almost comical. Like,
It is, I thought it was a
It's a joke.
Saturday night live
I know.
You
I
can just
know.
say a symphony. No, he's got to list all the instruments.
yeah, and the entire ensemble.
That's okay.
Like that wasn't the entire ensemble.
I know.
I know.
It's hilarious.
You see this repetition throughout Daniel, and part of it I think is oral. It helps you remember things for oral tradition, but yeah, it is kind of funny.
It must have been a common literary device.
Yeah,
I think so.
like, okay, we know what's going on here.
But it looks really
Move it
funny.
along here.
Oh yeah.
In modern terms.
I mean, it's like I can see these people taking 5 steps and suddenly having to fall down because and worship because someone has hit a bell. Or, you're right. I can see this being a hilarious Saturday Night Live skit.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess I missed that.
Well, and in
Strap the
this
all the
case,
instruments.
like I said, the king actually does get mad. So his ego
Yes.
does get the better of him rather than it being, like we'll see later, other people who do the law.
Yeah, Darius seems to be a nice king.
Yeah, Nebuchadnezzar.
But Nebuchadnezzar's a jerk.
But it also, like, I underline this because I thought, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come here. And I thought, yeah, this is not verbatim. Servants of the Most High. Why would he say that?
No, there's no way.
It's clearly meant for the listeners.
Had a huge religious experience in one day.
Right. It's clearly meant for the listeners to say that is what they're doing, is they are being servants of the Most High God and allowing for this potential death to happen.
So it was like Nebuchadnezzar at least had the humility to admit maybe that he was wrong about those 3, but still it didn't then, like, he still is stuck in, oh, but now if anyone else, you know, doesn't acknowledge that God, that person needs to be killed. So he still didn't understand grace by any means. He just
No.
was impressed with
still
this particular miracle. Yeah.
I think for most of recorded human history, the focus has been on worshiping the right God and arguing about who the right God is and that what that worship might demand. But that has been more important to be right than actually to think about what's healthy or good.
Yes.
And Jesus, I think, was trying to get us there. But
Bingo.
clearly that didn't quite work because we have a lot of people who then made Jesus worshiping
right
Jesus
God, yes.
the right God rather than the direction he was trying to point us in. And the whole Sermon on the Mount is about healthy religion and healthy relationship with God and with other people. But how often do we study that? You know, we
Once a year, I think.
at the most,
And
and
we barely touch on it usually.
yeah.
And that's
It's like, isn't it nice that we talked about being nice to the poor? That's usually what gets summarized as.
Something like that, and then and so I think this is a perfect example where it's just about what the right God is, the right worship, and then that's it. You're done, and the people who don't worship the right God are your enemies, and it doesn't matter what happens.
Well, don't we
And
all
it's-
just want a nice, easy, what is the right manual for how to get to heaven or be right with God and
it is-
live the right way?
And it's not just the right God, you have to right, worship Him in the right way. I mean,
Yeah.
this whole bit about Catholics versus Protestants and all the wars.
And then
and
subdivisions
fightings.
further than that, too.
Oh yes, I mean ELCA versus Wisconsin versus Missouri Synod versus Lutherans specifically,
Yeah.
and all the different
Yeah.
sects of Catholicism and Baptist
the Jehovah's
versus
Witness
Jehovah's
piece,
Witness.
where it's very-
I mean, for goodness sakes, I mean, this has really been a thorn that to me all this nitpicking when we're on the same side.
So
We should be.
a week and a half ago, before I left on my trip, I went to a multi-faith event, and there was a Native American leader. There was lots of Lutherans, by the way, Hindu, Buddhist, Jewish, Muslim,
Catholic?
probably. And we were all there to talk about justice and healing, and how we as leaders in our faith communities were basically forming bridges with each other because we knew that we were on the same side. And to me, that's really powerful, is like,
Yeah.
it's okay to have different faiths because, we're all on a different path where different things work better for us than others, right? Like the Quakers, it's a lot of silence. That's not going to work for everybody. Some people want the smells and bells, and some people want simplicity, and some people, we're on different. The problem where we got caught is we thought that our way of being different was the right way, rather than this is what works for me, and I'm feeling like I'm receiving what God has for me in this path. It was really cool. We got a tour because it was sponsored at the Hindu temple. We got a tour of the Hindu temple, and we walked into the inner sanctuary, you might call it, and they had these little alcoves with all these different statues of gods and goddesses, and I knew some of them. I felt like such a nerd. But right before we walked in, he said, the guide said, here's the way we understand it. There is one creator God. But as you'd have a light coming in the window, and then you'd have put stained glass window over it, you're going to have all of these colors on the ground, and you might be drawn to one color over another. And he says that's what all the gods and goddesses are, is they're aspects of the one God. And that one god or goddess might be what brings you to the one God. It's like the one that speaks to you because of your life experience. And that's how I had learned about what all the gods and goddesses were. And so it was kind of affirming to hear him say that.
Yeah.
And in his way, he was like, we're not so different. We all here he says, we're not polytheistic, we're monotheistic. You guys just haven't understood us. You haven't listened to us. Tell us. And then he said, this goddess, because God is neither male nor female, we have both male and female images, and and he went through and he taught us about what each aspect represented. And again, so we've spent so much time judging and condemning with little information what another faith is doing, rather than being curious about how they understand God in their own unique way. It was just a really neat evening, and to realize that at the end of the day, what we all wanted was a society in which all people were free to thrive and live together and have connection and harmony. We wanted to take care of the poor. We wanted to, we all wanted justice. We all wanted healing.
No, that's beautiful. And when you mentioned the different colors that draw us in, it's kind of like it's almost like the more contemporary upbeat music in some settings, and others it's like the more traditional music in those same settings.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, different settings it's like pairing different flavors of foods with each other. Different things too. It's like
Yeah.
Exactly.
There's nothing wrong with liking different foods.
Yeah.
It's like saying
that's fine.
Indian food is the true food. What? Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And I used to be judgy about certain kinds of worship music. And I'm not anymore because I realize that it's just a path for different people to be brought towards the divine.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And some people think rap worship is, sacrilegious or
I've
something
heard some
like
great stuff
Yeah,
from preachers and sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
No. You're making a point.
And you go, let's see, how are you going to reach these certain people? My goodness,
Yeah.
Oh, to think something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Preachers in disguise have some great stuff in rap.
Not bad.
I feel like as long as it's done well intentioned and with integrity,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
then the world is your oyster, and there's a lot of worship that's been in the right places that's been done without integrity. And
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
well, let's move on. So Nebuchadnezzar has another dream that Daniel helps him with. And then in chapter 5, this is the infamous the writing on the wall. So you have King Belteshazzar who has a big feast, and then words appear on the wall, but nobody knows how to interpret it, and Daniel's the only one who does. So when someone uses the phrase the writing's on the wall, this is where it comes from.
Oh.
And in verse 25, it says the words are many, many tekel parson, which is like weights and scales. And so, anyway, Daniel appropriately interprets it, and he's given more. So then now we get to chapter 6, where Daniel is clearly being risen up to a high place, and others are jealous of him. And so we get the Daniel in the lion's den. Does someone else want to read this one fresh for us? Jacob, do you want to
Sure.
read this?
Chapter 6 are you talking?
Yeah.
Okay.
Have fun.
It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps, stationed throughout the whole kingdom, and over them 3 presidents, including Daniel. To these the satraps gave account, so that the king might suffer no loss. Soon Daniel distinguished himself above all the other presidents and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king planned to appoint him over the whole kingdom. So the presidents and the satraps tried to find grounds for complaint against Daniel in connection with the kingdom. But they could not find no grounds for complaint or any corruption because he was faithful, and no negligence or corruption could be found in him. The men said, "We shall not find any grounds for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." So the presidents and satraps conspired and came to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever! All the presidents of the kingdom, the prefects of the satraps, and the counselors of the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance to enforce an interdict, that whoever prays to anyone, divine or human, for 30 days, except you, O king, shall be thrown into a den of lions. Now, O king, establish the interdict and sign the document so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked." Therefore King Darius signed the document and interdict. Although Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he continued to go to his house, which had windows in its upper room open towards Jerusalem, and to get down on his knees 3 times a day to pray to his God and praise him, just as he had done previously. The conspirators came and found Daniel praying and seeking mercy before his God. Then they approached the king and said concerning the interdict, "O king, did you not sign an interdict that anyone who prays to anyone, divine or human, within 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into a den of lions?" The king answered, "The thing stands fast, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked." Then they responded to the king, "Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the interdict you have signed, but he is saying to his prayers 3 times a day." Then the king heard the charge. When the king heard this charge, he was very distressed. He was determined to save Daniel, and until the sun went down, he made every effort to rescue him. Then the conspirators came to the king and said to him, "Know, O king, that it is law of the Medes." Is it Medes or Medes?
Medes, I think.
Okay. Of the Medes and Persians, that no interdict or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. Then the king gave the command, and Daniel was brought and thrown into the den of the lions. The king said to Daniel, "May your God, whom you faithfully serve, deliver you." A stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, so that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. Then the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No food was brought to him, and no sleep found him, and the sleep fled from him. Then at break of day, the king got up and hurried to the den of lions. When he came near the den where Daniel was, he cried out anxiously to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you faithfully serve, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Daniel then said to the king, "O king, live forever! My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths so that they would not hurt me, because I was found blameless before him, and also before you, O king, as I have done no wrong." Then the king was exceedingly glad, and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted his God. The king gave a command, and those that had accused Daniel were brought and thrown into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. Before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overwhelmed them and broke all their bones in pieces.
Oh dear.
Nice.
Then King Darius wrote to all peoples and nations of every language throughout the whole world, "May you have abundant prosperity. I make a decree that all my royal dominion people should tremble and fear before God of Daniel, for he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion has no end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, for he has saved Daniel from the power of the lions." So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian.
There you go.
Could you read that again? No, no.
The children thrown
Yeah.
to the lions.
No. Okay.
And then
Yeah.
after this, the book of Daniel gets weird. So if you want to read,
After that,
about four beasts and angels and stuff, then it gets exciting. But
It kind of turns into Revelation.
it
after
does.
that.
It gets into apocalyptic literature, which is a genre that is meant to. It is often written in really, really difficult times. It'd be actually curious. There's people who've observed the kinds of movies that are made with what's going on in the culture. When we have sometimes hyper realistic movies that are made, and sometimes we have very not realistic and almost comical, exaggerated movies, depending on what's going on in the feeling of the people.
Yeah.
They even mention that if movies that are either zombies or vampires depend on whether people feel like there's something about like vampires is like a seductive sucking the life out of you, and zombies is like the fear of the
wanna see
mindless
that.
being turned into like the mindless horde and losing your mind.
Nope.
So it's like, yeah, right. But it's what are people's fears and what are their deep desires get played out in the kinds of movies that are made, and it may not even be fully conscious. It's just like
sure, I'm sure.
it just kind of comes out, and so in the same way, apocalyptic literature was often written with certain themes to kind of give a particular message to people who are really struggling. Yeah.
Hello.
Excuse me.
is the world ending, and what are we going to do about it?
Yeah.
I'm going to reverse. I should take a picture.
Can we get through it?
And that's, I guess, what struck me is I thought, you know, in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abendago, Daniel, like, Daniel knew, he knew what happened, and he still went and did his thing. He also believed he'd done no wrong. Technically, he'd broken the law, but he said, I've done no wrong, probably because the law was unjust. And I've thought about this, that we could have a whole nother sermon that just goes along with the idea of, yes, Christians should be good citizens, but that doesn't mean we go along with unjust laws.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of cases in the Bible, including with what Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount when laws are unjust, of how you peacefully protest those laws by revealing their unjustness. And I think about, I know a lot of people that just don't know what's going to happen in the next 4 years and beyond. And it's really making me think very hard, what do I believe? And what am I willing to do as a person of faith that I feel has integrity and courage? You know?
Yeah, like Christ told us told people to pay their taxes, you know, like, that's not something you should do. Render Caesar, what's Caesar? Like, that's not a reasonable protest, I guess, in my view. Thing. But healing on the Sabbath was a law-breaking move. Like, that's a valid law to break, because that wasn't the point of resting on the Sabbath. That had been taken to an extreme.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at some of those extreme Orthodox Jewish communities today, that they go to really extreme lengths to keep kosher. That's
Yes.
probably a little silly.
Kosher.
quite honestly.
Kosher.
Yeah.
That's the word.
Obviously, not all Jews do that. Most Jews don't. But some of the extreme ones are trying really, really hard to be as godly as they possibly can. And that's probably what he was protesting against by doing that. Not really protesting. It was just, hey, this person's hurt. I'm going to help him.
Yeah. I think about that because I really love to listen to people like Elizabeth Gilbert. I don't know if you're familiar with her, but you know, she shaved her head, and she talked about that, how that's what she's going to do from now on is she's tired of spending all this money on making her hair beautiful and trying to achieve the cultural understanding of what a woman looks like to be beautiful. And she felt such freedom in shaving her head, even though it goes against the traditional standards of beauty, right? And then, as I mentioned, you know, you have this guy, Robin, who's continually exploring within himself. None of these people are telling anyone else they should do that. They're simply sharing, and this is what I find fascinating, a big difference between certain really conservative religions that say, no, we found the right way. We know how you should dress, we know how you should do your hair, we know what you should and shouldn't eat, we know how you should structure your day, and if you don't do that, you've made God angry. Who are they to say that?
Yeah.
And then there's these other people, these people who I love to read about, who inspire me. They're just figuring out for them what deep devotion to the truth is. And they're not expecting the same thing of anyone else. They're just saying, look, if I inspire you to do your own thing, good. But I can't tell you what that is. You have your own teacher inside you, just like I'm listening to the teacher inside me. I'm listening to the Christ in me. And maybe that means I shave my head and live in a tiny house or whatever. But for you, it's something else, right? To me, that feels more true. Is there'll be connecting threads, but the path of what feels faithful is not going to look identical for every single person, but it will have probably integrity and compassion.
Yeah.
It
and
can't
courage.
be anything. It can't be hurting other people. With
Right.
what you're doing, then it's not
Yeah,
coming from God.
right.
Yeah.
I don't know if we're born with or we acquire or whatever, but I think we all have a different sense of consciousness or right and wrong and that. I mean, so this is, I think it was in the second book, To Kill a Mockingbird, that was the main point. it came out that you have this different, degree of this stuff, and that's it. I don't know how you got it, born with it or you acquired or whatever. But
Yeah,
two aren't the same.
that's true.
Yeah.
Two aren't the same.
Yeah, that's a good point too. You mentioned Daniel saying he had done nothing wrong. What's law-abiding, what's right, is not always the same thing.
Yeah.
So, like Jesus choosing to heal on the Sabbath, he wasn't following the law. He was doing what was right.
Yeah.
And maybe that's the point of this too. Daniel praying was following what his faith told him he needed to do, and not what the law told him to do.
And far too often in these cultures, or when you get to these very controlling groups, such as Orthodox Jews, or strictly or strict Christian groups or whatever, a lot of times what's going on, they're saying that you'll make God angry. And this whole bit about fearing God.
Yeah.
And using that fear of God to control them. It's not so much you're making God angry, you're making me angry. But
What's been jumping out at me on some of this stuff, and we talk about these different groups, what sells? What sells?
And fear is a very strong.
Oh, wow. We haven't seen that lately, have we?
Oh, no.
No, not at all.
So it is. What sells? It's not right or wrong.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, I think this is just a really interesting story to ask us, in the middle of a culture where we don't necessarily know what's going on, kind of like Daniel, then how do we be in a way where we can say, I've done nothing wrong, no matter what they think, right? To me, that's really compelling, and it's only something we can each say for ourselves. I can't tell you what that is.
Who has lived a blameless life?
Oh, God.
And who is without sin cast the first?
That's right up there with being a self-made person.
Right?
I guess that gets into